There are moments in life that pass quickly and seem insignificant. A disrespectful glance, a rude message, or an unexpected change that unsettles us. Often we react immediately, as if emotion is in the driver's seat. We get angry, lash out, explain ourselves, argue, and then comes regret. But there is another way. A way of life passed down by the ancient Stoic philosophers. Do not react, respond. Not with emotion, but with clarity, not to win, but to remain whole. Because true inner strength doesn't lie in controlling the world, but in how you respond when the world refuses to go your way. In this video, we'll explore the Stoic path, learning to pause, breathe, and answer with intention as an act of wisdom, not defense. This is not merely a life strategy. It is the art of self-mastery in the midst of chaos. 1. Reaction is instinct. Response is a choice. There's a simple truth that's easy to forget. We're born with the instinct to react. When faced with danger, the body instantly shifts into fight or flight mode. Heart racing, breath quickening, mind clouded, emotions surging. This survival mechanism helped our ancestors stay alive in a world full of threats. But today, the things we react to aren't wild animals or natural disasters. They're careless words, dismissive glances, unintended actions, or a comment on social media. And we still react with the same intensity, as if facing a life or death threat. The body reacts fast, the mind follows, and behavior is decided in a fleeting moment where reason has no room. Reaction is automatic. It requires no thinking, no weighing of consequences, and thus no responsibility. It's the raw emergence of instinct triggered by an external force. When insulted, we retaliate. When rejected, we defend ourselves. When ignored, we respond with outrage or self-pity. These behaviors may bring momentary relief, but often leave lasting consequences. Regret, loss of control, hurting others, damaging our image, and more importantly, losing agency over our lives. The Stoics never denied emotion. They weren't emotionless machines, but they understood that emotion is merely the first response, not the final truth. Between emotion and action, there's always a space, and within that space, we have the power to choose. The power not to be led by impulse. The power to respond, not react. Responding doesn't mean suppression or denial, but an intentional pause to ask, is this worth it? If I act on this feeling, how will I feel in an hour, a day, a year? That response, whether it's a word, a glance, or simple silence, comes from a mind that has risen above the impulse of the moment. Quick reactions are often praised as bold, sharp, being real. But there's nothing easier than reacting. Anyone can do it. A child reacts when denied a toy. An adult without discipline reacts the same way, just using words, posture, or behavior to mask their inner weakness. In contrast, responding is harder. It requires emotional awareness, understanding the situation, and behavioral control. It comes from an inner strength forged not to appear virtuous, but to protect one's integrity. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." When someone offends you, what they do is trigger an emotional response in you. But only you decide whether that emotion becomes behavior. You don't control their words, but you absolutely control your reaction. If you let them provoke you, you've handed them the reins. But if you pause, breathe, and respond by your own choice, you remain the master of your life. The difference between a reactive person and a responsive one isn't intelligence, it's inner discipline. A smart person can still be short-tempered. A wise person can still lose control if they haven't trained their ability to observe and pause before acting. The Stoics understood that the space between feeling and doing is where the greatest inner battle takes place. And every time you choose response over reaction, you win a quiet, lasting victory that ripples far and wide. Anyone can react, but only those with depth choose to respond. It doesn't begin with intellect, but with awareness. When you notice yourself getting triggered, on the verge of losing your temper, and instead of striking back, you take a step back. Slow down. That's when you become different. And that difference not only saves you from mistakes, but sets an example for your children, your loved ones, your community. The world isn't short on people who react, but it needs more who know how to respond. Because only responders can heal, build, and lead with calm. A response is intentional, considered, and above all, creative. Rather than letting the world shape you through impulse, you shape it back with a mind and heart under control. And when this becomes habit, you are not just living stoicism, you are living the highest form of being human, a creature of reason, choice, and self-creation. 2. The pause. Shelter of freedom. There's something you can't see with your eyes, yet it shapes how you live, react, love, and hurt. The pause. The pause is a small, often fragile moment between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. It might last only seconds, but within it lies the full power of humanity, the power to choose. And for the Stoic, it's within this pause that inner freedom begins. When someone says something hurtful, you don't need to respond immediately. When you feel offended, you don't have to rush to explain yourself. When things go wrong, you don't need to panic and fix everything right away. The pause is when you take a deep breath, observe the emotions rising, and ask yourself, do I really need to react? And if so, what aligns with the person I aim to be? Most people live in reflex. We move so fast we don't realize we're being led by fleeting emotions. We reply to messages the second we see them. We yell the moment we're angered. We meet a hostile look with a defiant glare. And we think we're in control, when really we're being pulled by whatever happens outside us. We become products of circumstance, not creators of our own choices. The Stoics taught, create space between stimulus and action, because only in that space can you observe, reflect, and choose. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in every situation, keep this in mind, your ability to return to yourself. And the pause is the doorway that leads you back, not to escape the world, but to define how you want to meet it. In the pause, you stop acting from survival instinct and start acting from deliberate awareness. The pause is not procrastination. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger. Because you don't let impulse dictate, you let reason take part. And the person who brings reason into action holds true power over themselves. Many think quick reactions show sharpness, bravery, but in truth, the impulsive are the most fragile. They are easily manipulated, easily triggered by old wounds, prone to choices they later regret. In contrast, the one who knows how to pause begins to reclaim power. They create an inner space with no one else in it, no pressure, no noise. Just them and an honest question, what is the best thing I can do right now? Sometimes the answer is to do nothing, sometimes it's to wait a little longer, and sometimes it's to respond with kindness, even while hurting. These choices don't come from reaction, they arise only in the pause. And true freedom lies there too. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom not to be dragged by emotion, provocation, or circumstance. Freedom is staying calm in the storm, smiling under pressure, remaining silent in the face of insult. The Stoic doesn't aim to control the world. They aim to control themselves. Because they understand, the one who masters their actions masters their life. And it all begins with one small thing: a pause. The pause is also where you reconnect with your deeper self. You're no longer a bruised ego, no longer a child screaming for validation. You become a mature self, capable of choosing something greater than momentary anger. People often say, "I couldn't help it, I lost it." But the truth is, they didn't lose control. They never trained the pause. If you practice long enough, the pause becomes your new instinct, an instinct of awareness, compassion, and dignity. None of us are born knowing how to pause, but all of us can learn. Each moment of the day offers a chance to practice. When interrupted, when kept waiting, when hearing something unpleasant, when witnessing injustice. These are the tests that train us to pause before we act. And every time we succeed, we expand the space within us, where freedom, wisdom, and serenity quietly grow. 3. The breath. A bridge between emotion and reason. Whenever you feel angry, anxious, ashamed, or panicked, pay attention. Your breath is the first to react. It becomes fast, shallow, short, and rough. The body shifts into alert mode, the heart races, fists tighten, and the mind grows confused. In that moment, though no predator is threatening you, your body still believes you're in danger, and from a single impulse, you may spiral into a state of losing control. Sadly, most people never notice this. They let emotion drive behavior, only to look back later with regret. I wish I had stayed calm. The Stoics, even without modern knowledge of the nervous system or psychology, understood something essential. To master behavior, you must first master the body. And the starting point isn't lofty philosophy. It's the most accessible thing of all: the breath. Breath is an honest mirror reflecting your inner state, and also the most powerful tool to shift that state. If an emotion can change your breath, then breath can also change your emotion. It sounds simple, and it is, but in that simplicity lies the key to enduring inner strength. When anger rises within you, there's no need to fight it or pretend to be strong. Try this instead. Inhale deeply through your nose, then slowly exhale through your mouth, as if you were releasing the urge out of your body. In that breath, the intensity of the emotion begins to fade. You're no longer drowning in the wave of anger, but standing on the shore, observing it. That observation, that awareness, is the first step to reconnecting with your reason. For reason cannot function in a panicked body. It can only return once the mind is soothed, and breath is the bridge that brings reason back. Many people think staying calm requires a solid mindset or life experience. But the truth is, you don't have to grow up before learning composure. You can start with your breath, because it's always there, loyal and silent. You can't control everything in life, but you can always control your breathing. And once you learn to regulate it, you begin to see that emotions are not commands. They're just signals. You don't have to obey every feeling. You just have to see it, breathe through it, and then choose how to respond. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Don't let your imagination make you collapse under the whole of life. Stay with the present and ask, is this really so terrible?" When you connect with your breath, you're doing exactly that. Returning to the present moment instead of getting swept up in the flood of thoughts and emotions. The breath doesn't take you into the past or the future. It holds you here now, the only place you truly have the power to change anything. Before you say something in anger, pause and check your breathing. If it's short, rushed, and tense, that's not the time to speak. When you're about to send a bitter message, sit down and take 3 deep breaths. If, after 3 breaths, you still want to send it, then rewrite it in a tone that reflects the person you aspire to be. But if after 3 breaths you feel it's no longer necessary, you've just won a silent victory. One that isn't flashy, but brings real peace. What's powerful about returning to your breath is that it needs no space, no condition, no device. You can practice it anywhere, in your car during traffic, in a meeting while being criticized, in the kitchen when angry at your children, or in bed when haunted by something trivial. Every breath is a chance to reset, not to react out of old habits, but to respond as a better version of yourself. And remember, your breathing doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be conscious. Every time you catch yourself getting carried away and return to the breath, that's a rep in the gym of the mind. The Stoics didn't live by theory alone. They lived through practice, and practice begins with the simplest thing, a full, slow, present breath. 4. Don't mistake silence for weakness. In a noisy world where everyone tries to speak louder to be heard, silence feels strange. People often mistake it for avoidance, lack of courage, or the inability to stand up for oneself. But the Stoic does not see silence that way. To them, silence is not the retreat of the weak, but the deliberate presence of someone who has mastered himself. Silence is not the absence of power, but its most refined expression, requiring no display. When someone attacks you, you don't have to rush to respond to prove your worth. When someone says something false, you don't have to panic to defend your reputation. And when others insult, belittle, or poke at your wounds, you still have the right to remain silent, not because you're weak, but because you refuse to be pulled down to their level. The Stoic understands, not every word deserves a response, not every moment requires a voice, and not every offense must be disproved. The Stoics' silence comes from a deep place, where they no longer need to prove who they are to anyone, because they know who they are, where they stand, and that their value is not dependent on praise or recognition. A cruel word doesn't shake them, because they understand its source lies not in truth, but in the speaker's own disorder. Instead of reacting, they observe. Instead of retaliating, they hold steady. Not because they feel no pain, but because they choose not to let pain dictate their actions. Seneca once wrote, "Anger, when unchecked, often harms us more than the thing that caused it." The Stoics understood this well. They do not let others borrow their words to invade their minds. They do not allow emotional surges to overtake the light of reason. And they know that a cool head and a warm heart always choose more wisely than a mind caught in a storm. To them, silence is a form of self-respect. It's not passive endurance, but an active refusal to be ruled by what's outside. Many believe silence means defeat, but in truth, it's often the opposite. For those who cannot master themselves will erupt in anger, lash out, and then regret it. But those who can know when to speak, and when words would only waste energy. The Stoic doesn't remain silent out of fear, but out of clarity. While others rush into argument to win, the Stoic steps back to preserve peace. Because some victories cost more than their worth. Your peace, your dignity, your self-respect. Silence also protects your inner space. When you don't speak, you hear better, not just others, but your own inner voice. You can discern what's really happening. Is this injustice to address, or just a bruised ego? You can see the difference between truth and emotional distortion. And you can decide how to respond as someone who understands that the greatest freedom is not letting others force you to react. Silence doesn't mean agreement. It simply means choosing not to be controlled. Silence isn't avoidance. It's acting at the right time, from a grounded place. And sometimes what makes people reflect isn't a heated comeback, but the calm stillness of someone who refuses to play along. The Stoic knows if you can stay silent in chaos, you force others to hear the noise inside themselves. So next time you feel like yelling, arguing, or defending, ask yourself, is what I'm about to say truly necessary? Or is it just my ego demanding protection? If the answer is the latter, grant yourself the privilege of silence. No one can take your inner strength from you unless you place it on the table. And no one can make you react unless you hand them the remote to your emotions. The Stoic does not fear silence. They wield it as a subtle weapon, one that makes no sound, but compels others to listen inward. And in that silence, something profound happens. You are no longer pulled by emotion. You become the anchor of awareness. That is not weakness. It is the highest form of power, the kind that needs no words to prove itself. 5. Self-observation, the mirror of the inner life. None of us are immune to emotion. We feel anger, sadness, envy, and pain. That is human. But the real issue isn't what we feel, it's whether we're aware of how we feel. The Stoics didn't try to eliminate emotion, they simply refused to be ruled by it. And to achieve that, they began with a core skill: self-observation. Self-observation is the ability to take a step back, not from the situation but from yourself. It's when you don't just live, but can see yourself living. When someone offends you and you become angry, instead of drowning in that anger, you ask, why did this ignite me? What old wound did it strike? Am I reacting to what just happened, or am I carrying unhealed pain from the past? These questions don't just help you understand the situation, they help you understand yourself. Those who don't observe themselves often let emotions lead as if they were absolute truths. But emotions are data, not directives. They may signal that something's off, but they don't define reality. You may feel insulted, but that doesn't mean the other person intended to insult you. You may feel rejected, but that doesn't mean you're unworthy. The ability to observe yourself reveals the gap between feeling and fact. And in that gap, if you stay alert, the truth becomes clearer. Self-observation is like looking into a mirror, but one that reflects the inner self. It doesn't just show an image, it reveals motives, habits, beliefs, and the cracks in the soul we often try to hide. When you stop to ask, why did that comment bother me? Or why do I feel the need to win this argument? You're entering the most honest part of yourself. That space may not be comfortable, but it's the real starting point of growth. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, return to your inner self. There is a fountain that flows within. Dig deep, and you'll find fresh water. That line affirms a simple truth. The most important answers aren't out there. They're within. And to find them, you must dare to look inward, with honesty, without avoidance or excuses. Self-observation isn't self-judgment, it's self-understanding, which leads to wiser action. The Stoics practiced this daily. They saw each reaction as a chance to observe their inner world. A burst of anger wasn't a failure. It was a sign that something inside remained unhealed. A moment of envy wasn't proof of pettiness. It was a reminder of forgotten self-worth. Through observation, the Stoic no longer identified with emotion. They could feel it, but not act on it. because they'd learned to separate I feel from I am. And here's the paradox. The more you observe yourself, the less reactive you become. Not because you grow numb, but because you begin to see that most impulses don't come from others. They come from your interpretation. A cold glance only hurts if you interpret it as contempt. A careless comment only wounds if you already carry a negative belief about yourself. Through observation, you begin to peel away emotional layers and reclaim authorship of your inner narrative. Self-observation is also a path to healing, because once you see the root, you can tend to it. When you notice your temper, you uncover the insecurity beneath it. When you notice your sensitivity, you discover the memories you haven't accepted. And when you're brave enough to face yourself, you stop blaming others. You begin to reclaim your power to change. That is transformation, not loud, but profound. So, next time emotion stirs, don't ask, "Who made me angry?" Ask, "Why did I respond that way?" That question won't just calm the situation, it will clarify your mind. And the one who sees themselves clearly in every reaction is someone quietly stepping into ownership of their life, steadily, silently, and with strength. 6. Deliberate action, beyond the ego's grip. More often than we realize, we act not because something is right, but because the ego demands validation. We say what's unnecessary just to feel right. We enter arguments not worth having to protect our pride. We refuse to back down, even when we know it will worsen things, because deep down the ego doesn't want to lose. But the Stoic does not see action through the lens of ego, but through a single question: is this truly necessary? Does this serve the kindness, reason, and character I'm committed to building? Deliberate action comes after reflection. It isn't impulsive. It doesn't arise from emotional agitation, but from conscious choice. The Stoic does not rush. They don't need to respond immediately. They don't need to win a verbal sparring match to feel worthy. They understand that fast reactions often stem from ego, that part of us always afraid of being disrespected, desperate for approval, hungry for praise, and terrified of being hurt. And when the ego drives behavior, we often act against our deeper values. Ego isn't inherently bad, but left unchecked, it misleads. It makes you believe you must strike back to save face. It convinces you that silence means defeat. It insists that the last word proves victory. But the Stoic knows what begins in ego ends in disorder. What begins in intention ends in steadiness. So before they act, they pause and ask, "Am I doing this for truth or for pride?" When you act with intention, you're no longer swept up in someone else's energy. Someone may rage, you don't have to rage back. Someone may mock, you don't need to explain yourself. You don't have to mirror the emotions thrown at you, because your behavior is not about them. It's about the values you've chosen. That's the difference between someone who lives by principles and someone who lives by emotions. The first may be misunderstood for a moment, but remains consistent. The second may win a few moments, but eventually loses direction. The Stoic builds intentionality through simple questions before each decision. What am I serving with this action? If the answer is ego, image, or pride, they slow down. If the answer is truth, character, or peace, they move forward. At that point, the action is no longer defensive, but constructive. Not to dominate, but to remain whole. And here's what you'll notice. Deliberate action is quiet. It doesn't seek applause. It doesn't demand attention. It may not echo immediately, but its influence lasts. Because it doesn't come from ego's craving, but from commitment to what's right. When you live that way, You won't get pulled into every drama, won't feel pressured to respond to every comment, won't need to react to every criticism. You'll know not everything requires your presence, and not every battle deserves your energy. Deliberate action also conserves mental energy. When you're not led by ego, you stop worrying about what others think, say, or do. You don't need to explain, prove, or outperform. You just need to stay honest with yourself. And that honesty, quiet as it is the foundation of inner peace. So before doing anything in the heat of emotion, pause and ask, am I reacting or responding? Am I doing this to defend my ego or to express the person I want to become? That question, if answered honestly, can shift the entire course of your action. And that is how the Stoic lives, not by the gusts of pride, but by the compass of reason and inner virtue. 7. Respond with maturity, not emotion. The clearest difference between an emotional reaction and a mature response lies in this. Which mind is making the decision? The untrained instinct or the reason honed by experience and reflection? The one who reacts emotionally often acts immediately, driven by hurt, pride, or fear of being seen as weak. Meanwhile, the mature individual refuses to let emotional waves dictate behavior. They let the feeling pass, observe it, and act only once the mind has regained clarity. That is the mark of someone who has grown not just in age, but from within. Responding with maturity doesn't mean always being right, perfect, or in control. It simply means choosing to take a step back to better understand the situation before allowing your actions to send any message into the world. The mature don't ask, how do I win this? They ask, how can my actions reflect the person I aspire to be? That question makes them calmer, more observant, and less impulsive. That slowing down is not weakness, it is depth. The Stoics believe that maturity is the journey from reaction to intention. You're no longer driven by external triggers, but instead create space within to choose. When someone offends you, you no longer feel the urge to do something now to get even. You understand that dignity doesn't come from trading insults, but from refusing to match the low behavior of others. You no longer use silence as a form of resignation, but as a way of saying, I don't need to engage in something unworthy of my energy and time. And when you live with that kind of maturity, every response you give, whether it's a word, a glance, or a deliberate decision not to respond, carries weight. Not the weight of anger, but the quiet authority of someone who knows who they are and doesn't let fleeting emotions define them. I used to believe that silence meant surrender, that patience was an invitation for others to overstep, that if someone hurt me, I had to react immediately to reclaim what was rightfully mine. But the more I lived and observed myself in moments of agitation, the more I realized most of what I said in anger didn't reflect the person I wanted to become. They were merely echoes of emotions that hadn't yet settled. And what I regretted wasn't that I was wrong, but that I let emotion decide in place of reason. I've learned that maturity doesn't come from speaking honestly or bluntly, but from knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. I've learned that not every situation requires a response, but if I do respond, it must be done with clarity and intention. Every time I choose to pause, breathe, observe, and then speak, I feel not only more in control of the situation, but truly in control of myself. And that is the strongest feeling I've ever known, even when there's no applause, no praise, and no one who understands. If you found this lesson meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future content. And now, return to your breath. Hold on to the pause and live as if you alone are responsible for the state of your own mind. See you in the next video.